counsel to Dane Wigington of geoengineeringwatch.org, a California activist, and the Minnesota Natural Health Coalition, an educational nonprofit organization based in Minneapolis. The geoengineeringwatch.org is a data and research repository on the critical issue of global climate engineering and climate intervention programs. That website has had over 26 million people visit, and roughly 20,000 people visit that website daily. Minnesota Natural Health Coalition is a nonprofit focusing on natural health and health freedom choices. They've taken an interest in geoengineering because of their belief that geoengineering poses substantial harm to health. Thank you for the opportunity to offer comments here in support of House Bill 6011, the Geoengineering Act of 2017. And I begin my comments by stating categorically that man's ability to deliberately manipulate and control the climate and change our environment is no longer science fiction. More than 25 years ago, in 1991, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office assigned to Hughes Aircraft Company a method of reducing atmospheric or global warming by seeding the atmosphere with a layer of metallic particles, such as aluminum oxide. That patent is currently owned and been assigned by Raytheon, a defense contractor. In 2009, a report by the United Kingdom's Royal Society, which Representative Price referred to, said this about geoengineering, quote, appropriate governance mechanisms for regulating deployment of geoengineering methods should be established before they are needed in practice. And these mechanisms should be developed in the near future if geoengineering is to be considered as a potential option for mitigating climate change. The Royal Society further posited that there is clear need for governance of research involving large-scale field testing of some geoengineering techniques, especially solar radiation management and ecosystem intervention methods, which could have significant undesirable effects which might not easily be confined to a specific area. So I'm not going to go through the entire chronology of the number of congressional hearings and United Nations hearings and reports on this subject. But to put it succinctly, just last month, as Mr. Price spoke, researchers at Harvard University announced a project to send aerosol injections into the Earth's atmosphere in what is probably going to be the world's largest geoengineering experiment to date. Now, given this brief history, there can be no dispute that the technology to deliberately manipulate the Earth's climate is real. It has been studied and written about for decades. And academics and political leaders right now are seriously considering experimentation with the possibility of deploying geoengineering. These are technologies to intentionally manipulate the atmosphere and our environment as a plan of last resort, a plan B, if you will, to counteract the effects of climate change because our society has not been able to control emissions. And fossil fuels is still the energy of the day.
He was going from high fevers to chills. He had hallucinations, and so it was a very, very serious infection and fever that was causing all that in him.
The Serratia marcescens infection is so unusual to the doctors and scientists at the hospital that 3 of them team up and write a scientific article about it. At the time, the doctors are unaware of the tests the Army had conducted using the same type bacteria just days before. The scientific article is published in October 1951 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, reaching a very limited readership. However, the Army does see the article, and a panel of 4 military scientists reviews the case.
Some months after, they concluded, and this is a very strange conclusion, that the Army's bacteria and the bacteria that caused the infections in the hospital were not of the same strain or the same nature, and that any relationship was apparently coincidental.
Spread deadly bacteria over highly populated areas, or spray into the air invisible chemicals that can kill thousands on contact. A decision is made in high places. Tests are needed. San Francisco Bay, California, 1950. During 7 days in September, the Army simulates a bacteriological attack on the city. Declassified Army documents revealed that in 6 such attacks, large amounts of bacteria called Serratia marcescens are sprayed towards San Francisco from a small Navy boat in the bay. Carried by the wind, the airborne bacteria spread over a large area. The Army wants to know how far the bacteria can go. These declassified maps of the actual test show the extent of the area that is covered.
The Army decided to do what was called a vulnerability test program. And the effort was over a period of 20 years, actually, between 1949 and 1969, when hundreds of tests were conducted over populated areas to see whether, by spraying germs and certain chemicals, whether they would endanger a large population. The Army did spray a lot of bacteria around, although they weren't the highly dangerous kind that would be used as an actual weapon. The bacteria that they used did have some health risks.
Record droughts, and then all of a sudden, it's been raining cats and dogs. What's happening?
Well, it's important to understand, George, that when the climate engineers control the spigot, they can turn it on and off as they wish. And for those that don't believe this can be done on this kind of a scale, they simply haven't done their research. When you fill the atmosphere with particulates, you affect the hydrological cycle dramatically. So we can speculate as to the agenda of why the spigot's been turned on in California. But the overall agenda, again, is much, much larger. If you look at our society and all the things people are concerned about, I would ask this. If we have powers around the world radically derailing Earth's life support systems, climate, life support systems, atmosphere, and if they damage that beyond the planet's ability to support life, will anything else matter at that point? And I would argue, obviously not. So in the case of California, it's much bigger than just California. We have things happening in both polar zones right now that are not being reported, incredibly radical. In fact, frontline data looks like we may have an ice-free Arctic at the end of this year or next. That's about 100 years ahead of schedule. And I know people are ranting coming ice age, global cooling. I do challenge anyone, and this is not about Al Gore and carbon credits, both of which are shams. I would challenge anyone to look at the frontline data, look at the temperatures we're seeing. George, did you happen to notice that 2 weeks ago in the middle of winter, Texas hit 107 degrees?
Oh, I know, it's crazy. St. Louis had spent 70 almost all of February. It's crazy.
Exactly. The only reason we're having these radical cool downs because we had about a dozen instances of record high temperature to snow in less than 24 hours in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. That's because they're chemically ice nucleating wherever they have enough moisture to do so. So they're fire hosing moisture in from the west right now in a desperate attempt to create what amounts to a continental swamp cooler evaporative means of trying to chemically ice nucleate and cool things down. So you have a cool west now. You have the east frying. So to make clear to your listeners again, George, what this is all about, the most primary stated purpose for climate engineering, solar radiation management, to block the sun with light scattering particles because the planet is warming. And listen to what I'm saying right now because this is not a mistake. The planet's warming right now statistically at the thermal energy rate of 4 Hiroshima bombs per second. 400,000 per day. Challenge anyone. Look that up. Find the data. It's online. So if we go back to semantics, again, George, what I mentioned earlier about semantics being important.
Right.
Did you happen to see, George, the survey sometime back that was done by the main climate engineering disinformation source, Carnegie Science? Did you see the survey that said scientists state chemtrails aren't real? Did you see that?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Okay, let's look at that.
And I shook my head.
Okay, let's dissect that for a moment, if I may. Our legal team, the Legal Alliance to Stop Geoengineering, did a survey. We did a survey of our own, starting with the 77 scientists that participated in the, quote, chemtrails aren't real survey. And we added 1,430 more scientists to that list, and we publicized the whole list with the context, all the contacts for those individuals so people can verify its authenticity. Of those 1,500 scientists surveyed, including the 77 that participated in the chemtrails aren't real survey, not one, not a single one was willing to deny climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection. Not one on the record. So when you use the science terms, now it's not so easy to deny. So of 1,500 scientists surveyed, not one was willing to deny the ongoing reality that's happening in our skies every day.
Dane, as they control, can they control intensity? And by that I mean, if they want it to rain, can they make it rain as much as they want, or is it out of control?
It's a bit of both. So when you have an atmosphere saturated with fine particulates, if those particulates coagulate, come together to form a large enough condensation nuclei, you can cause the precipitation to fall. But if you have too many small particulates that scatter, that can cause rainfall to be diminished. Let me give an example of that. 1992, Mount Pinatubo, not so large of an eruption, but the particulates that one eruption put into the atmosphere made 1992 by 50% the lowest rainfall year ever recorded to that point in time because of the particles in the atmosphere. So with manipulation with radio frequency transmissions, and depending on the polarization of the particles, they can cause them to coagulate or scatter, which means they can diminish rain or they can augment rainfall. So we see some astounding precipitation events. If you remember some of the East Coast flooding that happened a year plus ago, we had 1,000-year floods there. So